Hello everyone, in today's video I'm going to be talking about how to heat your jars and your water in your Nesco canner. I'm Rebecca from StockingMyPantry.com. Now this video was inspired because I actually had someone in the comments ask me if I had a video on this topic. I do mention this sometimes in my video, but I hadn't created a dedicated video to the topic, and so I wanted to go ahead and do that in this video. Now, the good thing is the basic process is super easy, but I wanted to dig a little bit deeper and think about how long you should heat the water and the jars in your canner if you're doing a raw pack recipe versus if you're doing a hot pack recipe, or if you're also doing a pressure can or steam can recipe, which of course is less water than say a water bath recipe. So that's what I'm going to get into in this video. Okay, so first of all, I want to address a common saying, and it's one I have said a lot myself, and there's some truth in it, but it's not completely accurate. And that is the saying, if you're doing a cold pack, then it's cold pack, cold jars, cold water. If you're doing a hot pack, hot product, hot jars, hot water. Now, the reason for that saying is because you don't want to put really cold things into really hot jars and into really hot water, and because then there will be thermal shock, or at least there's the chance of that, and your jars will break. So I'm not totally discounting that saying, and like I said, I've said it myself a lot. However, if you really look at instructions in different canning books, including very reputable ones, they talk about hot jars and often hot broth, hot brine, hot syrup, that type of thing. Okay, so I'm going to give you a couple examples of that, and then I'm going to talk about how hot the water should be if you're raw packing versus hot packing. And then I'll get into the very basics of how to heat your jars. Okay, so first of all, let's look at one of my favorite canning books, the All New Ball Book of Canning and Preserving. And I'm just going to open it up to simple one jar meals. But you're going to see the same type of instructions, whether it's, pie filling or canned fruit or whatever. So step 1, prepare pressure canner and jars. Keep jars warm until ready to fill. And by the way, this is a raw pack. All of these are raw pack recipes, okay? And then, it talks about combining the ingredients, all of that. And then ladle hot broth over ingredients. Okay, so keep jars warm until ready to fill. Ladle hot broth. Okay, so, and this is using raw meat and, raw veggies and things like that. Okay, so that's one example. Here is the USDA, the Complete Guide to Home Canning. And I'm just going to look at how to can carrots. Raw pack. Fill hot jars tightly with raw carrots. Okay, and then it tells you to put salt in and all of that. Add hot cooking liquid or water, leaving 1-inch headspace. Okay, so again, there's the thing of it's raw pack, hot jars, hot water. Hot water, hot broth, whatever, into the jars, okay? Now, the thing is, obviously, like I said, you don't want too hot of water or too cold of water, depending on what you're doing. And so the only place that I've found really good instructions on the temperature of the water is in this book, The Beginner's Guide to Pressure Canning and Beyond by Angie Schneider. So I'm just going to take you to a couple of the recipes, and I'm not going to go into the recipe, but just instructions to give you an idea. Okay, the Cajun red beans is a hot pack recipe, and it says this is a hot pack recipe, so the water needs to be about 180 degrees Fahrenheit, and that would be 82 degrees Celsius. Okay, and then pot roast in a jar. It says this is a raw pack recipe, so the water needs to be about 140 degrees Fahrenheit or 60 degrees Celsius. So I use Fahrenheit, so I've given you the figures if you use Celsius, But just for the sake of example in this, for the rest of the time, I'm going to talk about the temperature of, for the hot pack, 180 degrees Fahrenheit, for raw pack, 140 degrees Fahrenheit. So I got to thinking about how long I would need to heat water and jars in the canner in order to achieve that temperature. So first of all, before I go into this, I'm just going to tell you very briefly the process that I use. So for those of you who just want to get to the point and don't care about times and all of that. So for any time that I do this, the basic process is, of course, there's always your canning rack. Into the canner, I put water into the canner. The amount depends on if I'm pressure canning or water bath canning. And I put some water into the jars and put them into the canner. Close the lid, but I do not lock the lid. And then brown and start. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn this off because I don't have any water in there right now. And in fact, once everything is hot enough to your liking, you just press stop to turn it off, leave the lid on, leave the jars and the water in the canner. And then the water will stay hot and the jars will stay hot. And by the way, I do want to mention that the 140 degrees for raw pack and the 180 degrees for hot pack, you do not have to be super precise with that. That is just a good guideline. Okay, so now let's talk about how long to heat the water and the jars, depending on if it's pressure canning, water bath canning, hot pack, raw pack, okay? Because those are all going to be a little different. And I do want to do a little disclaimer and say that these are just ballpark figures. And the reason for that is everyone is starting with different temperature water. I use tap water, and I used a thermometer, and I checked my tap water was about 75 degrees when it comes out of the tap, if I don't, put it on just the cold setting. Now, in the dead of summer, it might be hotter. If you live in a really cold place and your water's super cold, it may be cooler. But if you don't have a thermometer, these basic times that I give you will help you out. Okay, so first let's talk about pressure canning, or if you do steam can in your Nesco, these instructions will work for steam canning as well. Okay, so as you know, for pressure canning, you use 8 cups of water. I have this pitcher here with 8 cups of water. I'm going to put about 6 cups of it into my canner. And the precise amount isn't super important. But anyway, I'm putting about roughly 6 cups. I think I put more like 5. And then I'm going to put some water into my jars. And you do not have to put the water into the jars, but I do think that it keeps them from just bouncing around all over the place. So that's why I like to do that. Okay. All right, so I've got about 6 cups of water in my canner, and I put the remainder of water into my jars, and I'm putting them into the canner. Okay, so I would shut the lid, I would press brown, and start. Okay, now let's say that I was doing a pressure canning a cold pack recipe. I did a little experimenting, and again, this is just a ballpark figure, and it took about 7 minutes to get up to just over 140 degrees. So let's just pretend it's hit the 7-minute mark. I could set a timer on my phone, I could set a timer on my microwave, a kitchen timer, whatever you want to do, because I'm thinking, okay, I'm doing a cold pack recipe. I want to heat up the water and the jars to approximately 140 degrees. So at the end of 7 minutes, I would just press stop, and then I would go about my business, finish preparing my ingredients. Okay, leave the lid on, because the nice thing about the Nesco is things stay pretty hot in there for quite a while. And so as long as you keep the lid on and the jars in there, your jars are going to stay warm and your water is going to stay approximately the same amount, the same temperature. Okay, so 7 minutes for pressure canning or steam canning. in the cold pack will be about the right amount of time, approximately, for heating your jars and water. If you were doing a hot pack, let's say that you were pressure canning a stew and it was simmering away, you would leave this going for about 11 minutes before pushing the button to stop the timer. Okay? All right, now let's say that you were doing a water bath recipe. Now, water bath obviously uses a lot more water, so you would want to put more water in. Now, this again is an approximate amount. I found that about 22 cups of water, including what I put into the jars, is the right amount. And that reminds me though, before I go further, I want to just mention, did you notice that with my 8 cups of water, I put part of it in the pot and part of it into the jars? But when I'm getting ready to fill the jars, what I like to do, I'm just going to use my hand since they're not hot, but I would take my jars, and again I would use the jar lifter because they would be hot, and dump that water into the canner from each jar. And because of that, I would end up with 8 cups of water in the canner, which is exactly what you need. Now, I like to do it this way because I don't have to take the jars and dump the water into the sink or dump it into a bowl or that type of thing. It's just much easier. So you could put 8 cups of water in and then put extra water in the jars and then take the jars and dump them in the sink or bowl or whatever. But to me, this is just easier. So when I'm ready to fill the jars, I dump the water that's in the jars into the canner, and then I close the lid again after I've taken my jars out so the water stays hot. Okay? So again, once you've heated your jars and your water in the canner, they will stay the right temperature. Okay? But now let's talk about water bath canning. Okay, remember I already have 8 cups of water in there. I put in another 8 cups. And then another 6 cups. This is a total of 22 cups of water. Now, what happens with this, and I will take a picture of this, is that at this point, the water in the canner is not completely covering the jars. However, when I take the jars out and fill them and I dump the water back in and then I put filled jars in, the water goes up above the jars. Okay, so that is just my own personal experiment. It's going to depend on what jars you're using and all of that. But I have found 22 cups of water to start with is a good amount. So again, I would close the lid, not lock it, and then I would press brown and press start. All right, now let's talk about the times. Obviously, it takes a lot longer to heat up the water and the jars for water bath canning because there's a lot of water in there. So I ran my experiment, and what I did is I just checked at different times, and I just used a thermometer to check the water temperature. And I found that it took 16 minutes to bring my room temperature water up to about 140 degrees. And that would be the temperature for a cold pack. And it took about 28 minutes to get it up to 180 degrees. And again, what I would do is I would just set a timer. Let's say that I wanted them to heat for 16 minutes. I wanted it to get to about 140 degrees. I would just set a timer on my phone or on my microwave or wherever for 16 minutes. When it beeps, I would just turn it off. And again, leave the lid on, leave the jars in the canner until I'm ready to fill them. Dump the water from the jars back into the canner, and then, take the jars, fill the jars, and put my prepared jars back into the canner, and then start the whole process. And of course, I have separate videos on how to steam can, how to water bath can, and how to pressure can in the Nesco, and so refer to those if you want specific information on those. I hope that you found this helpful. If you did, I would really appreciate it if you would like this video, and if you haven't already done so, if you would subscribe to my YouTube channel. And by the way, as I said, this video was a question to answer a question by someone who left a comment. So feel free, if you have questions or you would like a video about a specific topic, feel free to leave that in the comments at any time, and I'll do the best I can to make those videos. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.